Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're from. My name is Mike Wallace, and I'm the Executive Director of Theatre Museum Canada. And today, I'm welcoming you in my role as President of the Canadian Museums Association. The CMA is delighted to be partnering with the Art Gallery of Ontario and Lee Groves Consulting on this summit session. Thank you for being with us here today at this Spotlight on Digital Engagement, a special summit on moving towards a visitor-centered, digital-enabled future. Today's session is scheduled for an hour and a half and will include a review of recent research presented by Lee Groves Consulting, and also a panel discussion on museum audience expectations and engagement around digital initiatives, what works, what doesn't, and how the pandemic changed the game. And we'll end up with some time for some questions. A few items of housekeeping. Today's events are being simultaneously interpreted into French. Instructions on accessing the interpretation are available in the chat. Closed captioning is available in English only. Slides will be shown today during today's presentation have also been made available for download, and you can find the links in the chat to follow along. The event will feature a 60-minute long panel discussion presented in 4 acts. Each act will include a short summary of findings, followed by a moderated discussion on the same theme. If you have questions for our panelists, please ask them at any time using the Zoom Q&A function. Other attendees will then also have the option to upvote the questions, and we'll take time at the end of the panel to take a look at the session's top queries. If you have any technical questions or are experiencing any technical difficulties, please ask in the chat. This is being monitored by CMA staff and AGO staff. You can also use the chat feature to say hello to your colleagues. And you could have stayed in your pajamas because your mic and camera have been turned off. I'd also like to start proceedings by acknowledging that all of us attending today are doing so from the traditional lands of Indigenous people. Personally, I am attending from the city of Toronto, also the home of the Art Gallery of Ontario, our partnering institution here today, and which is located on the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee people. Today, this land is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Lakefront we share with the city of Chicago, which is represented today by one of our panelists, Catherine Urich from the Field Museum. This is just one example of how in some way we're all connected by the land and water we share, and which has been cared for and stewarded for generations by Indigenous nations that have been here since time immemorial. I'd also like to acknowledge on behalf of the CMA that many of our staff of our secretariat are located on the traditional territory of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe people. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on this territory in mutual respect and gratitude. We also acknowledge that as an association, our work relates to many First Nations, Inuit and Métis and urban Indigenous people. We're committed to demonstrate respect for these groups and promote the importance of their cultural contributions through history and today. Please consider, if you haven't already, familiarizing yourself with the Indigenous history of the land you're on, and think about how it can affect and be included in your decolonizing work as a museum professional and steward of cultural heritage. Thank you. And next, I'd like to thank our event partners today, the Art Gallery of Ontario, including our moderator today, Mark McKay. I'd also like to welcome Anne Lee Groves of Lee Groves Consulting, who's been a research partner of the work informing today's webinar, and who will be presenting some of that research today as part of our panel discussion. Now, over to you, Mark.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. Great intro, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. We've got some of the best and the brightest of museums from across North America to share with you some of our findings about digital engagement from both before the pandemic and throughout the pandemic. A few years ago, we received some funding from the Canada Council's Digital Strategy Fund to perform some visitor research to better understand how our visitors want to use digital in the museum setting to better engage with us and enrich their experience, as well as to share our content management system that we've built at the AGO. Our CMS is built on Drupal and contains all the features a museum needs. It has an online collection, events calendar, exhibitions, and more. And it's all built around a concept of create once, publish everywhere, and an API that allows for the creation of new digital experiences. The other part of our project was the visitor research, and a lot of it was, we did our initial research before the pandemic, interviewing visitors at the AGO to understand how they wanted to use technology to engage with the museum. Through this research and working with Ann-Lee Groves, our research partner, who will talk a little bit more in a minute, we established some principles of engagement. Our research and plan always included forming a think tank to review these principles of engagement, but because the pandemic changed the way that we engage with the world, we wanted to understand how these principles had changed as a result of the new world that we're living in. And so today we've assembled a great group here. We've got Catherine Ulrich from the Field Museum, Seema Rao from the Akron Art Museum, Graham Rutan from the Galt Museum and Archives, Ryan Doherty from Contemporary Calgary, and our research partner, Ann-Lee Groves, who's going to speak, who are all going to speak today about what we've learned through the pandemic about our audiences and how we want to engage. We've got a poll set up right now that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. That's about where we want to understand from you that compared to 2021, what are your institution's plans for digital initiatives in 2022? Do you plan to increase them, maintain them at a similar level, decrease them, or maybe you're not sure? Please let us know. I'm going to invite my good friend and colleague Anne to speak now and let us know a little bit more about what we've learned through our research. Anne?
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate it. My name is Ann-Lee Groves, and together with my husband, Rick Groves, we run Lee Groves Consulting based out of Guelph. We are a research and evaluation firm specializing in audience engagement and analytics for the nonprofit sector. So we are really pleased to be here today to share this update with you on digital engagement. So I'm actually going to throw it over to our other panelists to introduce themselves as well before we dive into the findings. So we'll do just quick introductions from the panelists. So
I'll start. Hello,
thank you, Seema.
I am Seema Rao. I am the Deputy Director and Chief Experience Officer of the Akron Art Museum, which is, and I come to you actually from Cleveland, Ohio. Akron is an hour south of Cleveland, and we are on the land of the Mississauga as well, and the Erie. And I'm very excited to be here.
All right, thanks. Why don't we go to Graham and then Catherine and then Ryan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Graham Rutan. I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer for the Galt Museum and Archives in Lethbridge, Alberta. We are on the traditional territory of Treaty 7, which is home to the Blackfoot people, and also Métis Region 3. And I'm really happy to be part of this discussion.
Catherine, you're on mute.
Oh,
Of course it's going to happen.
2021, you know, you would think I'd have learned by now, but I am Catherine Urich. I am the Senior Social Media Manager at the Field Museum. The Field is on the traditional homelands of the Ottawa, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, as well as many other Indigenous nations. My work is to share the fact that we're a cultural institution as well as a research institution with our many visitors. So I do a lot of that that storytelling through our social media platforms.
And then Ryan.
My video is not turning on. Sorry. Is there something you could do to help? There we are.
There we go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Doherty. I am the Chief Curator at Contemporary Calgary, a new organization really that's just opened up a couple of years ago in Calgary that shows modern and contemporary art locally, nationally, internationally. We're also on the Treaty 7 region with the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Dakota, and of course also Métis Nation Region 3.
Great. Thank you to all our panelists for introducing themselves. So I'm going to start sharing my slideshow and to share with you that what we were asked to do was to reach out to museum leaders in digital engagement, and we ended up conducting 18 interviews. And because we wanted the research to be widely applicable, we talked to all sorts of sizes, types, different roles, and different locations. And it really did span a wide spectrum in terms of the things that people were doing in terms of digital engagement and how far they've gone in terms of reopening. I'll just point out a couple of teaser photos. So on the left here, we have the inflatable Sioux from the Field Museum that Catherine will be talking about. And then on the right, we have a screen cap from a Blackfoot language lesson that Graham will share from the Galt. So just to lay the background, what is digital engagement? So it's every digital touch point with a museum's audience. So interviewees talked about public-facing things like social media channels, virtual programming, their website, interactives in the galleries, but also internal infrastructure like collections management, Wi-Fi, online ticketing. And we saw that there's people in digital roles under education, marketing, or IT, but in larger or more mature institutions, we were seeing that digital roles are becoming less siloed and evolving into more independent institution-wide resources for digital strategy. And then on the right here is a photo for Field Trip, an online platform for art programming that Ryan will be discussing. So this digital shift, of course, happened very quickly. There was that initial surge of online content and almost became oversaturated a little bit, and museums really had to learn how to refine those early efforts to stand out, and we'll share their lessons learned today in this session. One of the silver linings we heard was that it really shook museums out of autopilot and had that huge increase in appreciation for digital work and digital literacy at museums. That previously people felt like they had to push for digital or that their work felt invisible, but the pandemic really accelerated digitization and digital became everyone's job. However, this downside now is that online audiences are experiencing Zoom fatigue. They really want to get back to the galleries or other in-person experiences. And also there's limited staff, that the digital staff are very, very burnt out, and that other institutions have had layoffs or furloughs or lost revenue. So there's limited staff capacity for digital upkeep. And on the right here, we have a screen cap of Seema on the Akron Art Museum's TikTok account, which this particular clip had over an incredible 900,000 views. So these core principles of engagement that we are going to be structuring the rest of our discussion around, this is about what can we do to support audience engagement digitally and beyond. So back from 2019, what we landed on was be approachable, make connections, and design to be user-friendly. And we asked our interviewees this time around, how do these resonate in the COVID era and how should they be updated? And for the most part, interviewees said that these are still broadly relevant, but that the context, tactics, and emphasis have shifted. So diving into this first principle of be approachable, pre-pandemic, it was really to help close the feelings of distance between what the museum offers and where visitors are, and relaxing those traditional notions of highbrow capital A art museums. And of course, this was for the AGO, so that's why we were focused on art here. and making content and gallery spaces welcoming and accessible for all. So what we've added to, and it is a plus sign because that is still broadly speaking applicable, but adding the current considerations from our interviewees this time around. So the first consideration is that providing more convenient, easier points of entry, that digital engagement is lower commitment, it's less intimidating, and for the most part, it's free. So it's much, much easier to be able to access this. We also saw broadening geographic reach and accessibility for people with disabilities. So we were hearing that digital initiatives have really helped museums become more inclusive, and with even small community museums really opening up to global audiences, which is amazing. And in terms of accessibility, museums are really incorporating inclusive design practices with universal standards and assistive technologies. Promoting equity and increased diversity of voices and viewpoints. This was really, really emphasized by our interviewees, that Truth and Reconciliation, Black Lives Matters, Stop Asian Hate, and other social justice movements have really placed additional emphasis on museums to advance DEI. And as one interviewee said rather bluntly, she said, museums can be about the legacies of rich white men, and it's a longer process to decolonize collections or renovate physical spaces. So digital can be a more immediate access point to add the representation and diversity, and for museums to step aside and uplift marginal communities and center their voices. However, one interviewee cautioned, and this is really important, that it can be problematic or performative if these initiatives do not result in real change. And then this last point about interactives. So some institutions have brought back interactives while others have not yet. Many are using QR codes in the galleries for now. Some are thinking about touchless adaptations like looping media or gesture-based or more immersive experiences. And some also mentioned moving towards a bring your own device model, where in-gallery digital experiences are designed to be accessed from visitors' own smartphones. Okay, so I'm going to stop my slides here and then go to our panelists for discussion. So I'm going to come to Catherine and Graham. And let's start with Catherine. So can you tell us about how digital initiatives have helped the Field Museum be more approachable?
Yeah, I mean, that is such a great list. And just to build upon it, I think I could talk about each one of those bullets as all of us could. But for us, very simply, when I think about being approachable, when it comes to our social media presence, it really just comes down to having fun and being approachable in the way that we sort of present our content. I think museums, especially of our size and with our history, can be very intimidating places, like you mentioned, Anne-Lee, and sometimes people don't feel welcome. They don't feel included. Myself included in that. I don't have a science background. I don't have a natural history background. And so it's really important that we make science for everyone. And I think sometimes by letting our guard down and allowing ourselves to have fun as institutions, we really open that up to everybody. And so for us, these inflatable Sue videos were a real way to show people that, no matter what your background is, no matter what your education level is, our content is for you. And so this sort of happened right after our building closed on March 12th of 2020. Our neighbors on museum campus, the Shedd Aquarium, they were doing some of their normal penguin enrichment where the penguin was running around the building. And I was sort of oohing and awing over this penguin because it went viral, of course. And I was also secretly bemoaning the fact that we don't have any living animals at the museum to share on social media. And my spouse was saying, well, you have these like dinosaur costumes. I'll put one of those on and we can run around the building. And I was like, yes, that's a great idea. And I don't think he expected me to take him up on that. And we were able to sort of piggyback on what they were doing on social. And we were lucky to have 250,000 engagements on our videos, and also get media pickups in CNN. And the best part of that, though, was that our audience loved it. And we continue to make these inflatable Sue videos, as we call them, and share them because they bring joy and they bring fun, and they are an entry point to talk about about science and natural history. So we like to think about edutainment, first entertaining and then educating. And our most recent one was a spoof on The Shining, where we used 2 of the inflatable T-Rex in a dark, creepy hallway upstairs, sort of to spoof on the twin scene from The Shining. So yeah, just using fun content to make science and whatever you're talking about at your institution available for everybody.
Great, thank you so much for those examples, Catherine. And then Graham, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the relationship that the Galt Museum has built with the Blackfoot community, and not just recently, but over many years, and how digital has had an impact there.
Absolutely. So the Galt has had for a long time a focus on letting community members be the experts on their own history, and letting their voices stand as kind of the arbiters of what is important about their own stories. And that really started with our collections team. We started doing full-length oral history interviews about every single object that they collected, and that's been recognized by the CMA as a very impressive program. We won an award for it last year. And that's really easily transitioned to our partners in the Blackfoot community, where we have been inviting individuals to come and present about their history, their culture, their language, their beliefs, in in-person sessions at the museum, which have been very popular, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. When the pandemic hit, we started making digital content just like everybody else did, kind of on the fly. And as we started kind of calming down and figuring out that we could do Zoom and record over Zoom, we started to invite some of those same presenters to prepare content and deliver it into their webcam, and then we would reshare it on our platforms. And as we became more comfortable going outside again and doing things like that, we started investing more resources into increasing the production value of these videos and inviting more individuals from the community to come and demonstrate their skills or products that they had made, or discuss their history or culture. And so it broadened the number of people who were coming in. And our focus was always on inviting them to talk about a subject broadly, and then recording it and doing the best we could in terms of production value, which at the start was a web camera on Zoom and not very good audio. And it progressed from there, and we ended up bringing in some contractors like Colbanks Co. to do like professional quality videos for them. And they have by far been the most popular content that we've been putting out, with a lot of viewership across Canada and in the United States as well, because one of the primary aspects of this is truth. This is a personal lived experience that they are sharing with other people, of themselves, of their community, of their family members. And our job is really just to kind of get out of the way and say, how can we help get your story out and your truth out as part of encouraging truth and reconciliation in our community, and being, even though we are a settler colonialist institution at heart as a museum, being actual partners and allies in the creation and dissemination of that content, and allowing them to use our platform to get it out.
Great, thank you, Graham. And I want to pick up on one thing that you mentioned, which was at the beginning that it was kind of low production value,
Yes.
but it was still popular because, and this is something that we heard from other panelists, that as long as you have the passion, that the digital space is a little bit more relaxed, it's a little bit more approachable, like we were saying in our principle, and the production value doesn't matter as much. The audience is rather forgiving. But I know in our interview with you, we also talked about how you made the investment to do higher production value because you wanted to honor that relationship with the community that you were engaging with, right?
Yeah, and the key to really all of the content, whether it was low production or high production value, was that it was those individuals that we had already created relationships with over a long time. And those relationships have only deepened and strengthened, and we've made more of them as a result of reaching out and inviting more people to do this kind of content. And it's something that we probably wouldn't have done as much if we had been still doing in-person things, because we would have relied on the same set of people that we'd already formed relationships with, that were already in our systems.
Great, thank you. That's a great point. And I just want to touch and make sure if any of the other panelists want to talk about being approachable at their institution before I move on to the next principle.
I'd love to say something. I'd like to underscore 2 points that Catherine made that really resonated with me. One was that Catherine started saying, I have to say, I'm really excited that your partner would dress up. My partner somehow didn't say that. He wasn't going to be Salvador Dali or whatever. There you go. But
I think he might not have had he known I was going to take him up on it.
Though I should say my partner has in the past dressed up as all sorts of things, so I won't slam him to the whole nation of Canada. But one thing that she brought up is that she started by bemoaning what she didn't have. And I would say that a lot of where we started last year, we had, for better or for worse, been starting a digital strategy. We had finished all of our planning and written it all up in February of 2020. And it was good because before that moment, we spent a lot of time with what we didn't have. We are we're right near one of the largest art museum in our state. We don't have any mummies. We don't have any dinosaurs. We have no living creatures. You know, we just started with all the don'ts. And that's a really, I think it is a thing as humans, we have to do that. But then it really quickly became, what do we have? And for us, we have that we are really this, it's much smaller than the institution everyone's looking at. We really are things that people know nothing about. So we're just, you know, can teach them anything. We went from not to do. And that was a great place to start with digital. And then we moved very quickly into what Catherine said, and I would underscore for all the small museums, but I mean any museum, but for small museums particularly, the one thing we can give you is joy. And we've tried to do it on all kinds of places. TikTok happens to be our joy. And that's the last thing I would underscore about what Catherine sort of said. And I think I could also, you know, hear it in a lot of our pre-conversations with the whole panel. When we enjoy it, and Lee said this, but that when we enjoy it, it's obvious. And you can tell when our people are kind of really into whatever they're saying on any of our platforms or experiencing, and people can tell. And that was one of the best lessons we learned from COVID that we're keeping.
Great, thank you for sharing those. So I'm going to share my screen again and discuss the second principle, which is make connections. So pre-pandemic, this was about guiding audiences to more compelling, meaningful experiences by helping them relate to the art. Again, it was because it was for the AGO, to themselves, to each other, and other ideas. And then the current considerations now are to think about less museum-centric, less object-centric, but more people and community-centric. And one of the first things is to build a relationship with audiences outside of visitation. So there's that old school of thought that museums really define their success by the number of visitors they have. But some of the interviewees that we spoke to argued that the digital visitor is just as important as the in-person visitor in terms of brand awareness and fulfilling your missions, and that digital channels are really valuable to have real live dialogue and connection to the communities that you serve, and that you can really tailor your communications by media channel because they have distinct purposes and audiences. And then this next point, Seema and Catherine have already touched upon, which is that empathize with your audience and evoke emotions. And what we saw a lot during the pandemic was institutions learning that using digital can offer moments of joy and solace for their audiences. That they said that the institutions had greater impact when they empathized with their communities and centered their emotions. So one of the interviewees talked about they were at an aquarium and they put a camera on their jellyfish tank and did a voiceover meditation over top of that, which I just thought was very lovely. And then finally, this last point, collaborating with partner institutions and sharing on other platforms. And this was that collaborations can really help amplify your messages and work for each other, and as well as providing a valuable support network for the institutions themselves. And interviewees also suggested exploring unexpected platforms and for a non-patron to discover your content and kind of be a side way to gaining new audiences. And some of the places that they talked about were Animal Crossing and TikTok, like Seema had mentioned. So I'm going to come back to Seema now and have her share kind of what is the Akron Art Museum TikTok and how's that different from what you're doing on Facebook or Pinterest?
So we decided that each platform was in very many ways a different code. And we as human beings code switch when we go to our mother's house or to our workplace. And we similarly decided that this was true. And we did it with a lot of research. So we looked at the audiences who were there. We had luckily already created profiles and personas and kind of different linguistic plans ahead of COVID. Not that we were planning for a worldwide pandemic. But what we found was that our strategy required different things. And what we do for one is not going to solve things for the other. And I suspect all of us think this in our regular work lives, perhaps, that you write a different thing for the members magazine than a grantor. But sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that. But because digital was the only place we were getting anything, our building was closed, the stakes were quite a lot higher. And so Facebook became what we thought of as, we call them Sue and George. There are seniors, young seniors, and then TikTok was for our very, very youngest. And by that we mean tweens, teens, and young 20s, Cristiano and Megan. And so we had these people that we imagined we were creating for. And the people who were on Facebook, for example, had a lot of deep knowledge about the collection and they wanted deeper knowledge. So they got longer videos, they got links to our YouTube channel, they had how-to sessions done by regional artists. And then the TikTok people get 15 seconds, often with me or my colleagues, kind of giving them the very, very basic kind of art appreciation. And the thing that's really important, I know that has already been touched on, but I cannot say it enough, is that actually meeting people where they are is a success, not a weakness. You are not dumbing things down by speaking in a way that people understand you. You're proving that you're smart enough to do that.
Great, thank you, Seema. And I know Ryan has a collaborative effort that he can share about Field Trip.
Yeah, where to start with Field Trip? It was quite a journey, but it started with, as you noted, this sort of onslaught of digital programming that was coming up. It was everywhere and being challenged to do various art things. It just felt, at the time, I was completely submerged in this, and it was overwhelming. It was oversaturated. So we got to thinking, like, how could we find a way to kind of curate some of this digital content and basically share it more broadly. And this was the birth of Field Trip, Art Across Canada, which it's a platform really for networking and for creating engagement content. So it's not about advertisements, it's about actual activities that other galleries are making that you then share through Instagram, through Facebook, through different platforms, to kind of in a really, like I say, a really collaborative moment. So we might create a workshop about how to make a puppet, and that then gets shared by many of our peers across the country. And what it does is it creates a really, our network, which might be, this big. Once you start linking networks together, it grows exponentially. And so the amount of content that can be viewed across the country, and it just becomes mammoth. So it was a very exciting activity, although I would notice that you also pointed out that there's been a lot of waning and Zoom fatigue, and Field Trip is definitely waning. And I think it's an interesting question as to whether it's about capacity, whether it's about a lack of interest anymore, but and it's also difficult to see other organizations sharing other organizations' content. It has become problematic because everyone's Instagram posts are so strategic now that they don't necessarily want to waste another post on someone else's content when they can only post so much. So it's fraught with a few issues, but I think the potential there is really interesting.
Thank you, Ryan. And I think you've encapsulated that there's so much potential and innovation that has come out of this, but how do we keep it moving forward, right? How do we upkeep this and keep it growing when there are other resource restrictions as we are kind of heading out of the pandemic?
Yeah, and that's a big problem, is that it is heavily resourced, and we don't have a lot of grants that are available for digital programming. We don't have, but yet we have high expectations from granting bodies to produce these kinds of things, but we have no additional capacity, no additional staff, no additional financial resources. So there's work to be done, definitely.
For sure.
And I wonder if we're almost like in like a bit of like a limbo now, particularly here in Canada, where we're starting to open up and things are starting to go back to normal, and we still have this residue of our pandemic digital engagement strategies. And what I'd be interested to hear from you, Ryan, and from the others as well, is sort of where do we see this sort of future going here, as we sort of make that transition from a almost like pure digital 18 months or so of the pandemic into a hybrid future of both like on-site activity as well as like maintaining those digital experiences and audiences?
Well, I mean, to that point, I think you're right. There seems to be little excuse to have a live event that's not live streamed anymore. And that's certainly been the case at Contemporary Calgary. Like we always have in-house and we have online, and both work collectively, and we take questions from both parties, and it works really seamlessly. So I suspect there is going to be a hybridized model moving forward. And, any of these events could be field trips, which I'm excited about. This could be a field trip event, this very talk that we're having today. So, and sharing this platform across the nation and beyond.
So I respectfully disagree. I think that there are things that certainly can be both live streamed. We were just having this debate. If an artist comes in and the artist is something that has no YouTube presence, this is a perfect thing to live stream. And if we can give them the great experience, both digitally and physically, great. But sometimes some of our organizations like mine, if the artist is already given 75,000 live streams, they're all online, is there a different digital product that will give the at-home viewer something as good as the on-site? And that's the metric that we use. You're in a huge market, I'm in a tiny market. You might have a lot more resources than I do. So what we do is our resources and the output and the need, and try to match it up. So there are things where we absolutely must simulcast. And then there's others we're like, is there a digital better? And that's where we're going. We're like, okay, this is how much we have. These are the people we want to reach. How are we doing it? So often your answer is right, but not always for us.
Yeah,
that's interesting that you say that too, Seema, because even before the pandemic, with all of the programs that we produce at the AGO, we had difficulty with live streaming all of them and had to make some decisions of which ones do we live stream. And we specifically looked at it through that lens of, who has a YouTube presence and is oversaturated, and then who can we start to build a YouTube presence for, and picked some of our key talks and programs to live stream those in order to create that sort of artifacts online for those individuals, so that when people are searching for those those speakers on YouTube, that they can find that content.
I think those are really important questions to ask, and especially what Seema was saying, what are we going to be adding? Like, let's not just do these things because we know we can do them, but let's add them because there's an audience desire for it, or because we know that we can do this virtual event, that the digital capability is actually adding something to it. I think these considerations are especially important as we are thinking about limited staff. We were talking, Anne, in your introduction, digital staff are feeling taxed. Some of us have fewer resources. I had a colleague from I believe it was Jessica Grove-Frank from the Adler. I think she said this, I want to give her credit, who said if 2020 was being on fire, 2021 is just accepting that you're on fire. And like, that is not, that resonates with me, but that's not how it should be. And that's sort of sometimes what this hybrid model is starting to feel like, I think, so.
And that's why we went to our thing. I feel like I read that too, but we decided 2022, we have a saying that we don't want to live like this anymore. And so we specifically told all of our funders, which is hard. And I remind you, we're only kind of lucky that our deputy director came out of digital. So I know what it takes when our head of the board says, can you just like make a video? I know what that means. But we basically were like, we can't. So I told every funder, if you want hybrid, that means on-site decreases and digital decreases. You don't get to have double. We have to have the same sum total, which, you know, as long as you really explain it and you explain how hard it is, Catherine, what she said is so true. We're all exhausted. Our staff is like, and we just started what we call No Decision December in all of my digital teams and all my teams, which includes marketing, community engagement, education. We are so decision fatigue done. Any decision we can put off this month, we don't do. And then we turn off all digital starting in the middle of this month through the end of the year. Because the idea for me is that, and this goes back to what Mark was saying, you actually have to make it long-term. It's not just about like the next, the Akron Art Museum, like digital, TikTok is not going to be on CNN. That's not my goal. My goal is that I make some people happy. And somebody asked a really good question in the Q&A I wanted to bring up. They were asking about our TikTok and then about the inflatable animal videos. That how do you deal with the idea that people are going to say that you're kind of dumbing it down or you're not an expert? Now, nobody knows who I am. We never introduce who we are on TikTok purposefully. It was a choice that we made collectively. So they don't know what our titles are, what roles we have on purpose so that we could keep some level of anonymity. I'm pretty lucky in that I actually do know what I'm saying. And I actually vet all those videos. So any of my junior staff who reads them, I would go to the bat for them. But we are very careful. It doesn't seem like we're towing any lines, but we're actually towing a lot of lines. And I'm sure that this is the same with the Field Museum. Good social seems like it's really like off the cuff and really in it, you know, like, hey, I'm making jokes, but you're not. You know what you're saying.
Great. Thank you, Seema. And I'm seeing some chats coming through to hosts and panelists, but I think some of those chats are meant for everyone or perhaps for the Q&A. So just make sure that you have the right toggle on. So if you are on the chat, you can send messages to everyone if that's appropriate. Okay, so I do have to move us on to the next principle. Okay, and this is designed to be user-friendly. So pre-pandemic, this was pretty self-explanatory, really providing an easy, clear visitor journey from pre-visit to post-visit. This is lowering barriers here. And then the current considerations, we really want to think about integration and seamlessness. So what could that look like? So that could be, you know, coming through your Instagram to your digital collection, to a curator talk about that particular piece that can also then get you to the gift shop if you want to buy a print of that. So having all those parts work together easily. And interviewees here talked about designing with digital first in mind can help address or eliminate barriers, not just lower them, and not to think of digital as an add-on so that you have to retrofit things later. And an important thing here that our panelists have also already started touching on is that digital should be considered a different medium altogether rather than a direct replication of the physical museum experience. Many interviewees also advocated for user-centered design and an iterative process. And this came from two questions that we asked. The first one was what would help you in your work. And many said they want to better understand digital users, that they're still a bit of a mystery. They're still learning about who they are and how best to engage them, but really wanting to know what their needs and challenges are so that you can design initiatives that will appeal and resonate with them. And then we also asked the question, what advice would you give? And for institutions just at the beginning stages, interviewees suggested focusing on one or two things, really aligned with your institution's mission. Don't try to boil the ocean. It's okay to start lo-fi. Again, if you show passion for the subject, that's where you want to start. And then getting into that iterative process, their advice for more intermediate or advanced institutions was that you can take risks and start experimenting, but pausing to evaluate and iterate and make improvements, and don't be afraid to drop things if they're not working. And then planning your infrastructure internally, this includes digital asset management. So information is organized and easily accessible to your audience, but also to your staff. You have to think about how user-friendly it is for the back-end users, because if your staff are not going to use it, then it's not going anywhere. And then also externally, you have to be considerate of the digital divide and bandwidth limitations for rural or remote communities in Canada. So I'm going to stop sharing and then go to Mark as our panelist for this principle, and to talk about how you design to be user-friendly and think about digital initiatives in that way at the AGO.
Great, thanks, Anne. I think it was, you said something that was really important, which was around having a digital first mindset. It is really hard to retrofit things after the fact and make them digital. Not impossible, but it certainly makes it a lot harder if something's been created for the physical experience or a print experience. So I highly recommend that if you are thinking about a hybrid experience, is to plan from digital from the beginning. And then a few comments on the slides and findings that you shared there. I really think that planning your infrastructure and being iterative go hand in hand. You don't want to invest a lot of time and effort into building something that people won't use. When we built the AGO content management system, we applied a lean startup approach. I'm not sure how many people know about lean startup, but there's a gentleman by the name of Eric Rice who wrote the book on it. It's literally called The Lean Startup, and it is a fantastic way of going about building things. It's all about creating a minimum viable product that you can build and measure and learn as quickly as possible, so that you can get feedback from your users and iterate on your product, whether that's a website, a video series, and endeavors in new social media. It's all about understanding what works as quickly as possible, so that you're not wasting time and resources on things that are not working. And really, this doesn't just apply to websites either, but also to content production. Over the course of the pandemic, we produced over 500 programs that reached almost 500,000 people. And to be able to do that was massive. We had mobilized all of the departments across the AGO, spearheaded by our education and programming team. We had to build a very sophisticated content calendar and system in order to not only just produce the programs, but also promote them and ensure that we were providing transcripts and making all of the content accessible before posting it on our websites. So in order to do that, we really needed to just focus on what's right in front of us and test and learn as quickly as possible. Otherwise, there's no way we would have been successful. I truly believe that the pandemic has taught us to integrate these digital considerations from the beginning, and that moving forward, more thought will be put into these. And it's not just about providing a seamless user journey from before you come to the museum to when you leave. It's really about making connections and being more accessible as well. You need to really think and view things through this lens of being user-friendly to create engagement. The tools and the experiences that we've created over the last year, I think, are going to continue to evolve as the pandemic fades away, and that we'll probably end up creating new ways of engagement based on what we've learned as we welcomed our visitors back into the museum.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I just want to call on Graham, because I know we had a few conversations about user friendliness in terms of adapting your virtual exhibitions, what you learned about, not just replicating the physical experience, and then also your interest in those that user research. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we at the start of the pandemic, we looked back at some of the in-house curated exhibits that we had done over the past like 5 or so years. And we began looking at how we could transition that content online, which we hadn't done before unless they were formally designed as digital exhibits or virtual exhibits. It was a daunting project to look at how we could do that, but we found some ways to take out of the box products and kind of bend them to our wills. And it took some creativity, but we had some very creative people on staff who were working with us. And so we found ways to get that stuff online and start listening to what people were saying as they were viewing it, and being able to tweak that content and add things like alt text when people weren't able to load the images properly when they were using a screen reader or something like that. And then that also transitioned into our commitment with our videos. We noticed that we had some captions on our YouTube videos that were associated with our exhibits, but nobody was correcting those. And so they were okay. They were pretty good. They were like 90% correct, but then there were a couple of words that were just wildly misspelled, or a couple of phrases where the microphone kind of dipped a little bit too low and it just lost it. But we knew what they said. And so we started to invest a little bit of staff time into going over those transcripts and making sure that we were being reachable and accessible in the information that we were providing to the community. And then we began transitioning those digital elements that had those additional accessibility pieces in them back into our physical space. And so the videos that had always been on display in our permanent exhibit, now they all have closed captioning embedded right on them. And so when they're playing without sound, they're intelligible to everybody who is able to access them visually. And when they're playing with sound, we have both accessibility formats. And as we keep listening to people saying, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? Some of it we're not able to do exactly the way that that particular individual would like, but keeping accessibility in mind always makes things more accessible for the whole. If somebody's having trouble accessing it because of auditory issues or because of ADHD issues and it's just too long, or like there's always solutions, and providing those solutions isn't just good for that subgroup. It makes it more accessible for everyone in our community. And so it really behooves us as cultural institutions that serve a community that we do it for the whole as much as we can.
Great, thank you. That's a great reminder.
To add on to what Graham is saying, not only is it great for our community's accessibility, it's also great for business. We live in the time of a semantic web where, programs and robots are reading our websites and the content on it to interpret it to be able to serve up the most relevant results to searchers. That could be on a YouTube video, a collection object on your website, a blog post, an exhibition. And if you're not making sure that your content is accessible and readable by screen readers and other assistive devices, then you simply won't be found. So I learned a long time ago that you need to start with accessibility first when creating content and include it in everything that you do. Because if you don't, then your content won't be found and your audiences won't be able to access it from where they are.
Great reminders. Thank you, Mark and Graham. So
brings up something that wasn't a question, if I could say it. I totally agree, Mark. And even if I hear even now, like Graham's talking about, he upgraded a little bit better. We still do, we use captions that TikTok already has and checks them. We use the YouTube captions. There is a way to do it. That is something where big organizations, small organizations can all find a way to make accessibility work for them. And I would totally say what Graham said. When you do accessibility, you might be thinking about one group, but you're probably helping lots of other groups you're not thinking of. But all of that is because somebody said, isn't this about digital transformation? It's not an add-on. And that's what it is, right? Accessibility, digital, they're all like integrated in. So if you think really early on, we had a senior curator who started in August, and he was in a meeting and he goes, wait a second, I didn't realize whose job is digital. And I was like, oh, it's everybody's job. Welcome. And that's true. It is. All of these things are making it systemic to your organization.
And it's important to create new workflows in order to support all of this. You know, we're producing so many programs on a weekly basis. And so we've had to create a solution where, you know, those who are presenting, you know, review the transcripts after the videos are made in order to proofread them and make sure that they're all correct before we post them. Because here in Canada, I'm not sure how familiar our audience is with the AODA laws, but, you know, you cannot post a video on your website without captioning. And it is all of our responsibilities to make sure that our websites and the content that's on them is accessible.
Great, thank you. And we're going to put up another poll now. Hopefully this will work. And we wanted to just do that pulse check before we get into the key takeaways, which is just how well do these updated principles capture the most important elements of successful digital engagement?
And maybe you want to share that slide too, so that we can all see those principles of engagement again.
Sure. Hold on. So it was be approachable, make connections, and design to be user-friendly. Okay, so take a moment to answer the poll, and then hopefully I think we will be able to see the results of the poll. I don't actually know how this poll works. Well, while we wait on the results of the poll, I'm going to move us on to key takeaways. So we came up with 3 key takeaways that hopefully will help you in your work in digital engagement. And the first is that it's all still a learning process. As you may have kind of gathered from our panelists, that it's really a time of experimentation, and success looks different for every museum. So that arc of digital engagement really depends on the type of institution, your resources available, your institutional priorities, and so many other factors. And there really is no playbook, and everyone is still figuring this out. And what we heard was that even the largest, most advanced institutions, they're still in recovery mode as well, and do not necessarily have super firm plans moving forward yet. And then the second key takeaway here is that we saw some silver linings in terms of the pandemic forcing huge strides forward for digital engagement, but that really dire need to keep that momentum going. How do we keep that momentum going? So having that acceleration, but also there are still gaps in understanding of user experiences and in integration of digital across that user journey, and in terms of digital literacy at institutions. And so, you know, those digital ambitions are really limited by staff capacity, and that there should be support for digital work to continue and to continue serving digital audiences. And then this third point here is that institutions need to be thoughtful and purposeful about the why and who for digital engagement. That at the end of the day, digital is just a tool. It's not the end goal itself. And museums have to be thoughtful and ask, who are we trying to reach? What is the impact we're hoping to have? How is this serving our mission? And not to do digital just to jump on that digital bandwagon. And also, not to just replicate things across platforms, and be thoughtful that digital is a different medium that has distinct audiences by channel. And then Mark also started talking about this too, is the recommendation to have an institution-wide content plan, and not just a digital plan, but an overall content plan that digital is a component of, to make sure that initiatives are aligned with your mission, but also with other engagements that are happening. And this will enable greater collaboration, integration, and efficiency rather than siloed initiatives. So I would love to have the panelists share any other thoughts, and then if the viewers can put in any questions into the Q&A, we would love to spend a good chunk of time to answer your questions as well. Okay. All right, and then can we show the poll results? We're doing pretty good. Okay. 58% for and 28% 5. All right, great. And if there's anything that feels like it's not resonating with you, or if we're missing something, please, put it into the chat, or put it into the Q&A as well.
And do you want to maybe just put the key takeaways on the screen so that we can speak to them?
Sure.
Great. From my perspective, I would say, it being still a time of experimentation, is that it's really important to define your experiments up front very clearly. As I mentioned earlier around the lean startup approach, is this is a scientific method where you're designing these experiments to learn as quickly as possible. So these experimentation doesn't mean just throw a whole bunch of spaghetti against the wall to see what works. But more to say, to have a little bit of rigor behind it as well, to say, I'm going to create this kind of content or this type of thing in order to best understand, how to properly engage with this audience, and through these types of experiments to really hone in on what works as quickly as possible. So I think that that it's important to view that first takeaway with that kind of a context, because it's not experimentation for the sake of experimentation.
I'd like to kind of jump on that, and I think that it's extremely important to start with a bit of a plan in mind beforehand, and it can feel really daunting to know that you have to do, it can feel like a plan has to then be executed perfectly, or else you're not going to get, or else it's a failure in some instances. So the being approachable piece I found really empowering at the beginning of the pandemic, where I was like, oh, there's not really like a plan for this that I can pull out of some conference notes. And so I quickly encouraged myself and my colleagues to not let perfect be the enemy of progress, and that every step that we would take along that road was great. And by establishing a plan with some key metrics and a plan for how we were actually going to assess the success or viability of the plan that we had devised was really essential. And then as we went along, to be flexible and to understand that failure is absolutely an option, and that as a result, it provides us with important information. And the last piece for this is just don't wait for perfect tools. Find something that's good enough, like an out-of-the-box solution, like captions from TikTok or YouTube, and make them work for you. Learn the skills, kind of agnostic of platform, because new things are always coming. Things are transforming so quickly. Yeah, being intentional about things is really important, because yeah, if you're throwing spaghetti at the wall, you have a big mess. Some of it got in the right spot though.
Oh, I would so totally second that. I think one thing that when you look at people who are experimenting, you're like, they're just trying all the things. But that's not true. We're really purposeful. A couple of people asked questions like, I'm such a small organization. I only have one person. How do I do it? And then somebody asked, what would you pick? And I would say I would pick what works best for you because I don't work in your organization. And it goes back to having that plan. So for us, our plan, so I happen to mostly talk about TikTok because that's probably been our biggest growth success this year. But each group had one thing they were doing. And it wasn't all the same. And one of them that I didn't talk about at all was not really very digital. We produced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studio kits that we gave to everybody and their brother in town. And that was an enormous success, but that was their success. And they did very short studio videos, but their goal was not digital in that case. So digital doesn't solve everybody's problems as long as you think really hard about it and have a good plan. Pick the thing that works for you.
Yeah, great.
I think,
And there's-
oh,
ahead.
sorry, Mark. Go
No,
ahead.
no, sorry. Go ahead, Catherine.
I was just going to build on some takeaways for me personally, and maybe others will this will resonate with, was in these past 18 months, how crucial internal relationships and relationship building has been. I think in this time when we've all felt so siloed, in a funny way, we've been more separated than ever, but sometimes I've also felt more connected to colleagues because there has been this ability to jump on a call very quickly. And through that relationship building, that is where we've found opportunities and collaboration across a lot of the museum. And that has made so much of the work easier, especially in a role like mine. And I think it's also opened up some opportunities for internal education about my work and digital in general. You know, helping people understand, to the earlier question, helping curators or subject matter experts understand, well, why are you doing this really silly, social media post, helping them understand that there is strategy behind it, and it is something that is in line with our brand and our reputation, things like that. I think those internal education moments are so important to the work that we're all doing.
So
I guess I would add that for my own key takeaways, one of the things that interests me is this idea of collaboration and resource sharing. If we're talking a lot about moments where we don't have financial resources, we don't have skills, we don't have staff to handle all this, but there are so many institutions all trying to do this on their own. And it just seems like an opportune time to work together and, again, just really share our resources. I think it'd be a great way to keeping the momentum going, like point 2 talks about. Like, we need to keep this, we don't want it to falter and wane. That's probably one of my key takeaways, finding ways to keep this going.
Great, thank you all. So I wanted to now turn to the Q&A, and remember that you can upvote questions in the Q&A. We may not be able to get to all of them, so that would help us prioritize which ones to answer. And then the chat is going by very quickly, so we're possibly not catching everything in there. So again, please put your questions into the Q&A.
I can see Mark is replying to revenue, and I'm dying to know the answer, because I will say that for our organization, what we decided was, we're a small organization. There was a lot of glut. So we do Zooms for our members. So it's free for members. There's a fee. It's pretty low revenue. And we decided that we would subsidize it with basically subsidize it by grants.
we've only actually just started to experiment with paid programming. We've only done one. And in fact, what we did is it was a very public, high-profile talk with the artist Ai Weiwei, and what we did was we were selling Ai Weiwei's new book, and through the sale of his book, you gained access to the live stream talk that we did. And so, when I think about, as a huge fan of music, I look at how musicians are merchandising themselves through bundling their content with merchandise. And I see, great opportunities for that. And someone else had said, how do you balance the in-person experience with the live stream experience? And I think that, being creative in, packaging things together like this is a real opportunity to, either increase visitation or to generate additional revenue by offering something more than just the experience itself.
So I think this is a related question. It's the second question from Nisa. Do any of your institutions expect you to monetize digital content or at least have conversion as your main goal? If so, how do you make the case for the importance of digital content for its own sake? So any other thoughts there?
Because we have very differentiated platforms, we have some that we don't monetize. So TikTok, we don't even we don't necessarily even say use it for bringing people to the building. It is completely independent. It is very specifically art appreciation 101 and fun. And then we do look at monetizing on programming, for example, digital programming. Sometimes it's either monetizing, so we, maybe members, the monetizing is that members become members to do these sorts of things. But we have chosen some that won't, and some are just digital only. And it's really important for our staff that they have places that they can do digital as its output, just as educators get to do gallery talks as their output or curators do exhibitions.
Great.
I think for us, also reminding people that social media, speaking from my experience, these social media posts are not here to generate revenue. We're not, putting a conversion rate on a post. They're here to raise brand awareness, to generate a love of natural history. And through that, if we're doing our job right, we will convert somebody from a fan to a follower. Hopefully they'll come and visit. And then at that point, perhaps they will donate, perhaps they will become a member. It's about moving somebody through the funnel in that way. We're playing a sort of a longer game about generating relationships, not about posting an Instagram video and trying to generate revenue from that video.
Yeah, and to Catherine's point, about building those relationships and those audiences, a lot of our focus has been on converting people to email signups. Like everyone here who has joined us today has given the CMA their email address, and now we all have your email addresses too. And this is such a big thing for museums because our reachable audience, really is how we're going to grow our businesses and bring new people in. And you might have just tuned in for a talk that you were really interested in, but maybe are not a art lover or a natural history lover. But by getting into our pipeline and providing us with your contact information, chances are that there'll be a communication that comes down the pipeline at some point of something that you're interested in, and you'll tune in again and again and again. And that's how relationships are formed and how we build our audiences.
Mm-hmm. And somebody asked a question like, how do you get everyone to understand digital is your job? In some ways it's, Mark's talking about friend raising, right? Like we're all in, the kind of this ecosystem Catherine's talking about. I have a lot of times that I talk to our donors and people about how getting people into our community is the job of all people who work here. We have a different media for doing it, depending on how our job is. If you're a housekeeper, you're making sure the space looks inviting. If you're in digital, you do it this way. But all of those are bringing people into a community. It's not about raising dollar bills. We understand we need dollar bills for it, but if you don't even get them here, they're never going to give you the dollar bills. And if you can start there, and that's how I communicate it. Everybody's job is digital on some level in the way that everybody's job is, if I see a piece of paper, I have to pick it up too. I'm not a housekeeper, but that's also part of my job. And we continue that kind of culture of togetherness, which is hard. Like I have, you know, we have back steps every week, but we just keep trying to remind them. And the best way I think to do it is to model it and to share things when you see it, and to, you know, just be really engaged in other people's jobs, and then they'll be engaged in you.
Great, great.
Great, thank you. And then Jen has a different question about live online education programs like school programs and tours. Wondering if there's any advice specific to those types of programs.
Oh, Graham, I saw you typing in there. Did you?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's so many different pieces that go into those programs. I think one of the big ones though is probably having, I mean, the best one is have really good content, do things really well in terms of content and how you're presenting it just as a person. But the other one is good audio, because if the people on the other end can't hear you, or if it's annoying to listen because there's glitches, or it keeps cutting out because your microphone on your laptop isn't picking you up because you're across the room, then that's a big problem for engagement. People will unengage from your presentation because it's uncomfortable for them to engage, to be part of a process that isn't working properly. And while a lot of parts of that are outside of our control, like sometimes the internet just goes down, the Wi-Fi all of a sudden gets really crappy, making sure that you have decent audio is really important. Good video, great too. Sometimes that doesn't work.
I'd also like to say, because we've run a very successful schools program at the AGO throughout the pandemic, and a few of the things that we found that were made it such a success were one, understanding the platforms that schools and educators are using. So for example, all of our programming is through Zoom, but the schools in Ontario use Google Meets. And so that was a bit of a challenge that we needed to address and overcome. And then another piece is about building the relationships with those school boards. How are they going to know that you have these programs if you're not letting them know that you have them? And so, you know, in order to grow, you need to really like reach out to those people and let them know the offerings that you have.
And to jump on one other point is that for those of us who are in small organizations, don't have those relationships, or maybe didn't have good audio or video to start. I know that in the state of Ohio, where I reside, we had a huge grant maybe 25 years ago, where a number of museums and nonprofits started doing distance learning. And actually, some of our biggest clients were the Western provinces of Canada. I mean, I gave in my early career scores and scores of distance learning lessons to schools in Calgary, for example. And when I came to this job, I thought, shoot, everyone is way ahead of me. What am I going to do? And my staff needed to come up with it. And what we did was, one, we purchased good video and good audio, because kids will not put up with what adults will. They don't even put up with what you do for TikTok. It better be better. But the second thing is that we really decided we only could do 2 lessons well. And we set that, and we did 2 lessons well. And in the first year, we taught 8,000 kids, having had no program. And the first thing we did was do exactly what Mark said, went back to our relationships. Said to the schools, we already knew, would you like us? And they did. And we actually are not planning to grow our program this year, because we decided we would decrease as we did online classes as well. But that we started with a doable number for us. And that's okay. You don't have to be as good as whoever on the internet.
And I think also that, you know, the Zoom fatigue is real as well. And so, you know, and I'm not sure that at this point there's really a way to combat that, you know, particularly as, you know, we're entering into a new phase of the world, as it were. And so I think it's really about, you know, a balance in hybrid model, like we've been all talking about here today. And so, you know, don't beat yourself up if your programs aren't working. You know, we're in the middle of a big transition here, I think.
That's such a great point, Mark. We had a program that was a partnership with our learning department called Meet a Museum Insider. It was sort of a digital translation from their in-person program called Meet a Scientist that happened at our Science Hub. And we created a weekly program on Facebook Live, and it started off super successful. So many viewers from all over the United States and even the world. And it's really just seen a downturn in viewership. So we kind of regrouped and we decided to pause for the rest of the year. And I think we might go from, rather than streaming from Zoom into Facebook Live, we might, now that we're sort of more in person at the museum, start doing it directly through Facebook Live, maybe in the museum for a much shorter period of time, because to your point, we think people are fatigued with Zoom, not having the same attention span. They need different backgrounds. They're maybe not so excited about seeing into people's homes. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Give yourself permission to pause, recalculate, or even let go of things completely if that's within the strategy.
I totally agree. And it's what digital's good at, right? Like we're okay with it. This is the one place, like I have a lot of other parts of my life, and I've had to cancel exhibitions because of COVID, and like shipping, all those things were so hard. This is where your colleagues realize, hey, it's great to work with digital. We can just, switch things and be okay with it. I think it's Graham who said, be okay with like, that doesn't work anymore. It's okay. I wanted to say there's a question about how do you moderate social, and I would love to give a compliment to Catherine. When we were trying to figure out how to do this, I asked my social team to look at peers who I really respect, and I really respect Catherine and her team and her colleagues. I know them in real life, probably it helps, but I know that they deal with it with a real kind of grace, but also humor. And sometimes that's what it is. And we did actually use the Field Museum as one of our examples to put up our rules internally on how we deal with trolls on social. We deal with trolls that we don't deal with trolls. That's our policy. If they get too troll-like, we stop. And I know that that's a thing that can be hard. It's hard for my team sometimes. The trolls come at like in the evening when you would like to not be at work. And I really respect what Catherine's done. I know that there are lots of people who maybe don't believe in dinosaurs or evolution or whatever, who are always on their platforms. And that to me is how I would say to anybody, pick out some organization that's doing it well and handle it, or else be okay with them. TikTok has some people have told me how unattractive I am for months on TikTok, and it's okay. It's fine. That's their opinion. It's okay. Or whatever they're saying. They make all kinds of crazy comments, and you got to be okay with it. So those are the two pieces of advice I have for that question.
Well, and it seems like they're telling untruths too, Seema, because you're very beautiful.
That wasn't actually fishing, but thank you.
Thanks,
We also
Seema.
have a funny thing, which is it's also true though. On our TikToks, the worse the presenter happens to look like if I haven't done my hair or if I have like cuckoo makeup, because I'm messing around with my kids, that's when it does well. That I do think for TikTok and some of our social, being a little unfinished is really good for your brand. Maybe not always good for how you look, but.
Yeah, I will echo that. We actually looked to our colleagues over at Monterey Bay Aquarium when we were trying to, as well as many other organizations, but they are a real beacon for me in community management and moderation. So they were very helpful in creating our community guidelines, which are posted on our website. And we have a vanity URL. So in case we ever need to throw those out there to fans or followers, we can do that very easily. And yeah, I will say, just be consistent with your moderation, and try not to take it personally, even though that is very, very hard. And remember that, even though these channels can feel like your channels, they are talking to your organization, not to you personally. Sometimes that bit of distance helps when the trolls come
That's
out
so true.
at 6 o'clock on a Friday night.
It is always 6 o'clock.
Great. I think we have one last unanswered question here, which is, how have you all navigated getting enthusiastic buy-in from stakeholders, especially those who control access to budget and time?
I think, for my part, we were lucky. We're a small organization, 50 people. The deputy director is in digital, started in digital, always was in digital. So we're lucky. That said, it has been a trial with my ED. He doesn't really, sometimes we have to help him navigate our website. He's a very nice man, not digital native. And what we've done is helped him by finding other people who help him. So when his hairdresser says, "Oh my gosh, I saw your TikTok," or his mother saw our Facebook Live. That often helps. So I think that finding ways that other people like it and putting out good content that consistently gets that really helps. Also, whenever we get good comments, we send it straight to him. And so we do a lot of internal marketing. You just have to.
Great point.
That's
I'm
not
getting-
unique to us either. Like there's a lot of that has to go on in terms of like maintaining records of when you're doing things really well and the kinds of comments that you're getting back, so that you do have a stockpile of things that you can go to your the people who control the purse strings and say, look, this is successful. We are successful at what we do. We designed this project, we designed a process, we executed the process, we learned things along the way, we were flexible, and here's the outcomes of those projects. And it's not to say that everything has to be successful, because failure also gives that kind of really good feedback about, well, this obviously didn't work for our audiences or for the purpose that it was intended for. But like really maintaining like, this is what we do, this is what we do well, and going out and finding like different awards or things that you can apply for or whatever. Build up your resume and the resume of your team. Like build up their notoriety within your organization as people who work well with others and who are both willing and capable of learning new things, bringing exciting, interesting ideas to the table, and then executing on them in really strong ways to boost the profile of the other people in your organization and the organization as a whole in the community.
Thank you, Graham. I think on that note, we will have to wrap up our session. So I want to thank the CMA for hosting, and thank you to Mark and the AGO for leading this initiative, and of course to all the interviewees and today's panelists for sharing your wisdom with us. We will send out a link to the video of this session and the slides, and also a survey, because we really would love your feedback on your webinar experience today, so that the CMA can improve their webinar offerings in the future. And we will also follow up with a full report for this initiative. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope everyone has a happy and healthy holiday season.
Hey, thank you, Anne, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great and happy holidays.